To start the system, we're going to let some water go through the tank. Now, to do that, I like to put the system in backwash. That way, if any debris is in there, it doesn't end up in a faucet somewhere, it goes out to the drain line. So to do that, we're going to hook up our transformer. Into the side here and a little plug. Take it over here, plug it in the wall. Now, we have a series of buttons here. We have a settings button, an up and down arrow, and then what's called an extra cycle button. This extra cycle button is what initiates a regeneration. So we're going to push and hold this now so we can put this into regeneration, into what's called a backwash mode, and that's how we're going to introduce water into this tank while this valve is in the backwash mode. So let's push and hold that. You'll see it says go to backwash. It's crudely, but it says go to backwash. You'll see this BW here. Once that stops blinking and we see an actual time value here, then that's when we'll start to introduce water into the actual system. Okay, now you can see there's actually a time value here. Now that'll turn to 14 to 13 to 12. We haven't programmed anything yet, that's why we're seeing a larger number here. Typically that would only be a 10-minute backwash. So once we're in the backwash mode, we're going to come back here to the bypass, and I don't know if you want to come around on this side so you can see here. Your inlet bypass valve is what we're going to slowly open and introduce water into the tank. You can hear it start to slowly come in there. Now, we don't want to turn this on full blast, because what can happen is it can push that inner tube and actually smash that inner tube. So we're going to crank this open a little bit at a time. Now, you can tell if you get too much going, because you'll start hearing a knock up here with all that air coming out. It'll really pop, 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 and you'll hear it. And then you can just easily just turn it back a little bit and slow down again. But over this 15-minute backwash cycle, we're going to want to fill this tank all the way up and flush it out for a little bit. Now, once you're in the backwash mode, if you don't have any air and your water is running clear like mine is, you don't have to wait for the entire backwash mode. You can go ahead and advance the valve. If you want to advance the valve past the cycle, you just push and release that same button again, that extra cycle button or that regeneration button. And it'll say go to BD. Now, if the light was off like mine was, you'll have to push it and make the light come on, then push it again. You kind of got to bring it back to life first and then push the button again. During the brine draw cycle would be typically when we would be pulling in a vacuum from the brine tank. But we're not going to do that right now because we want to advance this to the rinse cycle, rinse the media, and then we're going to advance it to what's called the brine fill cycle to push all the air out of this line and actually get some water in there, solid water. So once we see that number there for brine draw, we're going to go ahead and push and release the button again, and you'll see go to RR, which is rapid rinse. We're going to let it rinse there for maybe a minute or two just to rinse it out. So once we see this time value, we'll wait till it counts down 2 minutes, and then we'll go from there. So once you've let it rinse for a couple minutes, then again you have to turn the screen back on by pushing the button. And push it again and it'll say go to brine fill. Now during this cycle we want to let it run for about 2 or 3 minutes too. That's going to push water back through this tube and it's going to take all the air out of there, so that way it's ready for the first regeneration. So it's going to say go to BF, and once it gets to BF, you're going to see a time value there, and we're going to let it count down for 2 minutes. So right now you have 0, 1, 2. So once that gets down to about 10 minutes or so, then we know we've pushed enough water through here to push all the air out of this line, basically. I'm going to move forward now, but typically you would let this run down to 10 minutes, then push the button again. And when you push it one final time, it'll say go to service. That means it's going back to the regular service mode where you would just be naturally using water in the home. Now, once you're back at the service mode, we've started the softener. So what we would do now, if you want to come around here and look at the bypass again, we still have our outlet valve off. So we would turn that on slowly, just in case there's any more air there. And now we would go to the closest water spigot and turn the water on and just let it do some additional rinsing to make sure that there's not any other fines or pieces of dust in the line. So we'll go over here and we'll turn on our faucet and do some additional rinsing there. We're pretty good with no air. So we'll shut that down. Now if you're seeing some dust, you may have to let that run for 5 or 10 minutes. We don't have any resin in here, so I'm really only getting dust that was in the tank. So once you've cleared that and you know it's clear, then we can get to the programming mode, which is really the last step in the installation. Now to do the programming, you can use the manual. The manual is going to walk you through each step, but there's a couple things that you have to know first. You're going to have to know your hardness level. You're going to have to know the size capacity of your actual system, because there's a math equation that we're going to need to do first before we can actually start programming. There's a chart in the book, and we'll put a chart up here on this video too, but different size softeners have different grain ratings. This particular softener, being a 1 cubic foot unit, would be a 25,000 grain unit, okay? So with that being said, that means it can treat up to 25 grains or 25,000 grains of hardness. So depending on what your hardness level is of your water, let's say it's, for easy math, let's say it's 25 grains, you would take 25,000, divide it by 25, and that'd give you 1,000 gallons. So that means this system could treat 1,000 gallons if your water were 25,000 or 25 grains per gallon, okay? Now, you may get a hardness level that's in parts per million or milligrams per liter. You're going to need to convert that to grains per gallon, and you do that by dividing it by 17.1. So if you see mg/L or you see ppm for your value, just remember, take that value and divide it by 17.1, and that'll give you your grains per gallon. And that grains per gallon you can again put into your equation depending on what your size of your softener is. So again, I said this was a 25,000 grain unit. We have 25 grains per gallon of hardness. So when we divide that, we have 1,000 gallons of treatable water. Now the next thing to keep in mind is a reserve capacity, because you don't want to run out in the middle of the day and be at absolute zero and not have any treatable water until that night when the system would regenerate. So we usually figure about 75 gallons of reserve capacity per person in the home. So let's say this particular home has 2 people in it, so that would be 150 gallons for 2 people of reserve capacity. So we would take that 1,000 gallons that we came up with, and we'll subtract that 150 gallons and bring it down to 850. That gives us that 150 gallons in reserve capacity. So when we get to the gallon setting on this, we're going to put in the number 850, because we did all this this equation right now in our head. But there's actually in the book, it lines it all out, and it gives you and shows you how to put your numbers in and to do the equation, and you'll get the correct number. So with that being said, we're going to start programming now. We're going to just push a button to bring the light on here. So we have the settings button, the up arrow, down arrow, and the regeneration button. We're going to push the settings and the up arrow at the same time. And you'll see it says set 1 time. So now we push the setting button again, and you'll see the time, the hour flashing. Now keep in mind, this is a 24-hour clock. So it's not your traditional 12-hour cycles. So 1 p.m. in the afternoon would actually be 1,300 hours, and so forth. So keep that in mind. Right now, it's 11 a.m., or actually, it's 12 a.m. here, or 12 p.m. here, so we're going to leave that on 12. Once we have it there, and if it was 1 p.m., we would take it up to 13. But it's 12 p.m. here, so we'll leave that on 12. We're going to hit our settings button again, and it'll take us over to our actual minutes. Now, here it's 12, 14. So we're going to go up to 14. And we're going to hit our settings button again. Then it goes to the next parameter to set, which this is set to type. What this is asking you is what type of meter system do you want to set this up for? We want to use what's called the TM, or the timed meter. That is a delayed meter that will count every gallons that go, all the gallons that go through here, but will regenerate the system at 2 a.m. opposed to in the middle of the day when it hits absolute zero. So we're going to hit the set button again, and the type now is T. We want to set that to TM. So you can see it's TM. We're going to hit the set button again. And that'll leave it at TM. Now this is settings 3, which is CU, which is the capacity. This is where it's going to ask us to input our gallons, okay? The gallons flashes because you can choose liters or gallons, but here in America we're going to use gallons. So we go to gallons, we hit the settings button. We're going to leave the single digit alone. The second digit we're going to switch to 5, because remember we're going to switch to 850. We have the reserve capacity figured. So this next 0 here, we're going to take it down to 8. And then we're going to take the 1 down to 0. Now we have our reserve capacity figured in of 850, and this is how many gallons we're going to get between regenerations. So we hit the set button again to the 10,000 mark, hit it again. Now we go to set for hour. Okay, so we're going to hit the set button. This first number represents what time of day you want the system to regenerate. Right now we have this set at 2 a.m., which is perfect for most households. Basically you want this to be 2 hours after you go to bed. If you're working the day shift and you want it to go off in 2 in the afternoon, then you would change this to 14, because again we're on a 24-hour time clock. So we're going to leave this at 2 a.m. because that's usually good for most households. Now this next setting confuses a lot of people. This is hours of override. Basically this means how many hours do you want this system to run before it will regenerate automatically regardless of how much water you used. So where this comes into play is if you take a vacation or something like that. You've been gone for a couple weeks, it hasn't used any water, but you want the thing to be regenerated and fresh but when you come home. Then you would put in a set number of hours that would cause it to regenerate right before you got home. Now if we went for 2 weeks, which is 14 days, that's a typical setting for most people. That would equate to 336 hours. So we would change this to actual 336, and that's what we're going to do for this one, because that's a typical setting. So you can see it actually stops on 336. So basically what that means is if the meter doesn't cause this to regenerate in 14 days, then this hour setting will cause it to regenerate based on that. Now we hit the set button again, and it sets set 5 backwash. Now what this means is it's going to allow us to set the backwash time. Typically if you're on well water, you would leave this at 15, because well water you're probably going to have some sediment, maybe some precipitation of other contaminants that we want to blow out of there. But on city water we can take this down to 10. So to do that you can hit the set button again until you get to that 5 digit. We'll take that down to 0 because we're going to assume we're on city water here. Hit the set button again, and then now we go to BD, set 6. So we hit set again. Now BD is the brine draw, and it's set for 60 minutes. Now people always say, well that's a long time, and it is, but it's that way purposely. And the reason why it's that way is because we want to move salt solution through this tank really, really slow. And over a 60-minute period at a real slow flow rate, we get a very good regeneration of the resin. So this will always stay at 60. You won't do anything here other than hit the set button until you go to the next parameter, which is the rapid rinse, set 7. So we're going to hit that. The rapid rinse is set up for 10 minutes. That's typical for most situations, and I would leave that there, city water or well water, leave that at 10 minutes. If it's not at 10 minutes, then obviously you can hit the set button and change each value. And then your final setting is the brine fill setting. Now this is going to be exclusive to the size of system that you have. So we want to make sure we're getting at least a 10-pound salt setting per cubic foot. So with this being a 1 cubic foot unit, we need to feed it with 10 pounds of salt. You can get about 3 pounds of salt in every gallon of water. So in this case here, we need to put about 3.5 gallons of water in the tank. The system puts the water back in the tank at about 0.5 gallons per minute. So 3.5 gallons divided by 0.5 would mean we need to run this for 7 minutes in the brine fill cycle. So, and this is all on a chart. When you see the size of your system, it'd be 25,000 grains, and it'll tell you brine fill 7 minutes. So we're going to hit the set button, and right now it's set for 12, which is overkill. So we're going to take the 1 down to 0, the 2 up to 7 minutes, and then we'll hit the set button. And that is programming complete. Once you've done that, the system's programmed. It's readily charged when you start it, so you don't need to regenerate it for the first time. It's already ready to go. So you'll get your 850 gallons. This thing will kick into a regeneration and regenerate itself when it's time. Now, something that I want to point out is you can always tell if you're having a problem with the system not metering water. If this meter stops working for whatever reason, then it's not going to count gallons, so it's not going to regenerate. It's thinking it's not using water. So to test that, you can turn water on somewhere in your house. That's what I'm going to do now. And when water's running, you'll see this little drip blinking. Okay? That lets you know that it's counting gallons. And as this drip blinks, you'll see this number will slowly decrease from 850, and it'll go down to 849 right there. That's an indication that the water you're using is being counted and it's going through the system. Now, if you have a faucet that you don't think is going through the system, you can turn it on and come down and see if that's blinking. If it's not blinking, then it's not plumbed in. And a lot of times that can happen for like the kitchen cold side. We get a lot of calls where, you know, the cold water in the kitchen's putting spots everywhere, and that's because that's the way the builder plumbed it in. So you may have to have that changed or keep that in mind when you're using that water. The other thing too is, let's say you have everything off in the house, but you think water's running somewhere. You can come right down here and look. If you know everything's off, but this thing's blinking, you know it's going somewhere. It's leaking in a crawl space. You got a toilet tank valve leaking, something like that that's wasting water. So you can also use that as a tool. This is a pretty basic water softener. It's based off of the 5600. So this is really a typical installation for a run-of-the-mill water softener. This particular unit is a pretty robust unit. It's got a nice cover here that we like. Overall, it should be a very good unit for you. Make sure you keep salt in it, and again, use all the salt, refill it, and use it all. Don't top it off every week. This is the installation video for the US Water Systems 56 SE Aquatrol.